Now I want to welcome up my panelists, Muneeb and Alexei, to continue the conversation, but looking broadly at the L2 landscape, the layer two landscape in Bitcoin. As we discussed earlier today, Bitcoin's ecosystem has exploded over the last year and a half and more aggressively over the last 4 months. But as both Ryan and Meltem and I spoke about earlier, people have been developing in the Bitcoin ecosystem for well over a decade, and many milestones have been achieved since. But when it comes to Bitcoin L2s, according to L2 Watch, as we looked at earlier, there's over 70 different new Bitcoin L2s. This landscape has evolved aggressively. And so, Muneeb, Alexei, welcome both of you to today's panel and to Building on Bitcoin, the Halving Edition. Let's talk about the Bitcoin L2 landscape. The halving was 4 days ago, April 20th. How has the halving interplayed into this evolving Bitcoin L2 landscape? Muneeb, we'll start with you.
Hey everyone, good to be here. Hi Kyle, hi Alexei. So I think this is a very, very exciting time. Like the way I look at the halving, yes, it has an economic impact and sort of like, traditionally it has marked like the start of different cycles. But I think the other interesting thing the halving sort of does is that at this point it's more like a Super Bowl for crypto. Like it's the big event where, if you've been working on a project, like you want to launch it around this time when there's a lot of spotlight on Bitcoin. And I think we saw that effect. We saw that with Runes, we saw that with Stacks Nakamoto, that people were sort of like rushing towards making their launches like on or around the Bitcoin halving. And I think that's a very exciting thing, like just from a community and culture perspective, that this is a time when developers like sort of like showcase what they've been building. And I think that was the part that sort of like stood out for me.
Alexei.
Well, I can fully echo that. I think we've seen, lots of excitement and lots of build-up about runes, about layer twos, upgrades. The halving is a very nice state. Lots of attention on Bitcoin, lots of reporting around Bitcoin. So naturally, lots of teams picked the halving to go live. Same for us, or like within the halving. So for us, it's next week. And the other thing that we saw, I believe, is there was quite a lot of media attention from outside of the usual Bitcoin kind of ecosystem. The halving is like the time when everybody reports on Bitcoin every 4 years. Also traditional media talk about Bitcoin, and I think the anticipation was we'll see more eyes and more people looking at Bitcoin again. Oh, last time I checked was 4 years ago. It was a pet rock not doing much. What's going on now? And oh wow, there's so much stuff. There's assets, there's NFTs, there's L2s now at Bitcoin. And I think, we definitely saw some more attention coming in. And I do think we'll see more activity over the next couple of weeks.
I have to agree on the attention. This was discussed earlier in a few other panels of the amount of attention that came from not just mainstream media, but in general around the world towards the halving. Rena Shah, who's a part of the Trust Machines, mentioned this on the very first panel of just how much magnification came because of the halving around Bitcoin as an asset and as a network, which then empowered those that are building on Bitcoin. And Alexia, I want to ask you, I mean, you and the team at Bob are preparing for an upcoming mainnet launch. Stacks went mainnet almost 3 years ago, and I'll ask Muneeb a little bit of his lessons learned during that and what's to come. But talk to us about your mainnet. This is a big, exciting time for the L2 space. You as a rising Bitcoin L2, what does this mainnet mean for you guys?
Well, I mean, it means we have to deliver. So we've been building up for a while, and yeah, I mean, it's obviously very exciting to coordinate with quite a few teams, and like let's imagine with like more than 15 teams that's supposed to go live at the same time. At least that's the ones that we know of, and then there's teams that are just telling us, "Oh, we're going to deploy on day one." I'm like, "Oh, great! Do you need any help?" No, we're all good. But then you need to coordinate like with like multiple hundreds of people to get everything right. So it's very exciting, and we can't wait to see DeFi, Runes, NFTs all go live on Bob and actually start getting ETH users into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
I love it. And Muneeb, to you, I mean, talking about the landscape of Bitcoin L2s, you have been building in the ecosystem of Bitcoin for a number of years. Stacks went mainnet 3 years ago in 2021. Nakamoto's large upgrade just started to begin its rollout. What are some of the lessons learned? But more importantly, what does the landscape look like, having been a part of the foundation that was Bitcoin L2s that now has evolved?
Yeah, I think in terms of building these large, complicated systems, I think our lessons have been these things are harder than you think they are. They take more time and resources than you think they would, right? So people who are signing up for building these things, I think the biggest lesson is you have to be committed to the long term, right? Like you're gonna build through multiple sort of like bear market cycles, and you have to kind of like learn, iterate, and have that sort of like passion for what you're doing, because if you're not like actually mission driven, at some point you're going to run out of energy, right? At some point you're going to run out of enthusiasm, and you like move on. And I think if you look at the people who are sort of like stuck around, they're really driven by the passion that they believe in Bitcoin. They believe that this is good for society, this is good for humans, and they want to see it work, right? And I think Bitcoin is actually very high on that, and that's why I'm really excited about more developer energy coming to Bitcoin. That when these mission-driven developers who maybe at heart were Bitcoiners, but there was more activity going outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem at that time, and they were sometimes maybe stuck in some ecosystems that they really didn't even want to be in. And I think now there's a clear pathway. There are clear opportunities where a lot more capital is coming in, a lot of intellectual capital is coming back to Bitcoin as well. Like in terms of other more specific lessons to stacks, I think when we did our mainnet, coming from the Bitcoin culture, we were really optimizing for decentralization and security. So a stacks block would occur every time a Bitcoin block would occur. And I think maybe we didn't give enough importance to UX, because users are getting used to much faster speeds, and they have different expectations for how they want a L2 to behave. And I think those have been like some of the bigger lessons, that the Nakamoto upgrade, I feel, is much more focused on the expectations of the end user and putting the end user first, and trying to see that, hey, can we give them the best user experience of actually using Bitcoin? And I think that has been a pretty important lesson. And obviously then that trickles down into the infrastructure and all the different design decisions that you're making.
And there's a lot of discussion around L2 or layer twos, and specifically in Bitcoin, because how many of these protocols have begun to redefine maybe what a L2 looks like as we knew it once before in Ethereum. But when we look at the L2 landscape for Bitcoin, what will they enable, both respectively stacks, Bob, but all the others as well? What is the hope that they enable, and what they can provide for the future when it comes to the modularity and the development of technical stacks on Bitcoin? Alexei, we'll start with you.
So, I mean, I think this whole terminology bingo with, like, oh, it's an L2, it's a rollup, it's a side chain. Previously, everything was a side chain. Now everything is at layer two. I'm personally not a big fan of being very strict about, oh, you should not call it X, you should call it Y. I'm more of a fan of, okay, well, you can say it's an L2, but where does it get security from? How to get Bitcoin into the system, and just giving users a bit more clarity. And that's why I've actually helped on the advisory side create Bitcoin layers, which is a version of L2B, but for Bitcoin L2s. And when we talk about what these L2s should enable, I think there's a wide range of applications, but the ones that I'm most excited about right now is making access for Bitcoin into DeFi as simple as one click. We've seen that there is demand with WBTC. There's been $10 billion of dollars worth of Bitcoin in WBTC for a long time that is used, and that liquidity is sticky. So you see people actually want to use it, but that's just a tiny fraction of what Bitcoin actually is available on the Bitcoin main chain and of the Bitcoin that sits in centralized exchanges. And I think in the last cycle, we all realized, and a lot of us got burned by the misdoings and mischief nature of some of these centralized exchanges. And now I think, with, making Bitcoin DeFi a thing, we can actually get much more liquidity, much more users to start doing things with the Bitcoin. And from Bob's perspective, we're positioned as a hybrid. So we embrace like the innovation that has been created on Ethereum. We try to be connected to that ecosystem. We onboard some of the leading DeFi projects from Ethereum, and then work on the infrastructure side to make it super easy for users to deploy their Bitcoin into these DeFi products. So if they want to just trade their Bitcoin, if they want to borrow against it, they want to go more sophisticated and create some form of staking products. And the goal here is make it as accessible as possible, get to a point where the UX is not only as good, but actually better than on Binance. And I think that what we've seen in the last years that centralized exchanges have dominated the Bitcoin space for so long that the UX is actually not always that good. And there are ways to improve, there are ways to make it easier, and specifically composability of DeFi is a major selling point. Instead of you having to have accounts with 5 different exchanges to go through KYC with all of them, you go to DeFi, you can use all sorts of DEXs and lending protocols within a single wallet. And I think bigger exchanges have realized that and they started to launch their own Web3 wallets, which is perfect because now suddenly you can get access to Binance's, to OKX's users, to Coinbase's users through their wallet. And that's super exciting because you have DeFi users who have been used to using DeFi apps, AMMs, DEXs, lending pools, perpetuals, like depending on really how you can go as complicated as you like, and they all have Bitcoin, right? 99% of them got into crypto through Bitcoin. They have BTC lying on centralized exchanges on the ledgers somewhere, and activating that group of users and is very important. I think you'll be surprised how much Bitcoin they actually account for versus the Bitcoin that we see in Lightning and the Bitcoin that, you know, a lot of the more like Bitcoin only community and more like strict community in terms of everything else is bad will account for on like day-to-day basis. And that I think is a massive opportunity. And of course, the Bitcoin ETF being approved just opened the floodgates. You already have 90% of people in crypto getting like into crypto through Bitcoin, but with Bitcoin layer 2s, you actually have a net, right? You can catch them before they leave Bitcoin and go to other ecosystems. And if you think about it, when media reports about blockchains, media reports about crypto, they report about Bitcoin first. And I think this is a unique opportunity for Bitcoin L2s to not only capture the existing user base on Ethereum, which you already see happening, right? There's lots of projects cross-deploying to Bitcoin projects, but also, and not only, you know, access the current Bitcoin user base, but actually capture the millions of users that will be entering the market over the next years and become the main place for these users to actually, you know, use stablecoins, borrow stables against Bitcoin, trade Bitcoin against USD, and experiment with new products.
Muneeb, why now? Why are we seeing so much momentum suddenly? Again, a ton of development has been happening for years, but why all of a sudden now are we seeing this monumentous momentum happening across the Bitcoin L2 space?
I think there are a couple of factors here. One of them is definitely ordinals. So I think Casey deserves a lot of credit for ordinals. Like there was something about ordinals, something about putting the image directly, so like on chain on Bitcoin, that gave people the aha moment that, oh, look, my NFT is actually now going to live forever because Bitcoin is the most durable chain out there. And I think that directly resulted in not only developers coming in, but also the Bitcoin fees going up. And I think when the Bitcoin fees go up, like now L2s are no longer sort of like this optional thing that you know people are building and you may never use. They're become like a medicine to a pain point that everyone is feeling, right? Like whenever you go to mempool.space and you see like 200 sats of fees and they are in red, you go like, I'm not paying a $40 transaction fee on a $100 Bitcoin transfer, right? So I think suddenly Bitcoin L2s become like a pain point, like a solution to a pain point that people are feeling right now. So and it makes it just very, very real. So I think that was definitely one. I do want to give credit to a lot of people in the Stacks community because one thing that they did, like before that, what I call the dark ages between 2017 and 2022, developers were actually not very welcome in a lot of the Bitcoin circles. If you have any idea that's outside of Lightning, you'll actually face a lot of hostility and so on. So one of the things that people in the Stacks community were doing, they were creating alternate communities, like alternate developer communities, alternate developer conferences. Like, for example, we did the building on Bitcoin Builders Conference with Bitcoin Miami. Rootstock was there. Some of the Lightning people like Lightspark, like they showed up. And then you start getting a sense of like developer community and momentum around Bitcoin. So now if you're a new developer and you come here, like you at least have a subset of the community that is very open to developers. They welcome them, they walk them through the landscape, they help them out. And I think that was very important. So the basic foundational stuff was there. Same with like, wallets and API providers. Like I know Xverse and Leather, they were originally sort of like Stacks L2 wallets, but when Ordinal started, they went in, they were one of the first to actually embrace Ordinals and help sort of like the user base over there. And same for API providers. I know Alex from Hero was speaking here earlier. Like they went in, they were already providing API for the L2s, and they sort of like started doing that for Ordinals as well. So I think that's base level support was there. So when new devs were coming in, they actually saw momentum. They saw like the basic infrastructure in place, and then they started building on top. And I think that was sort of like the two things where I would also go back to the point of using the terminology of Bitcoin L2. I completely agree with Alexei over here that using the term in a broad way is the way to go, because this is not the time to sort of like have more infighting that, oh, you're not an L2, you're not an L2. Whatever term is working in the market for average people to understand what these things are sort of works. Obviously, there are going to be some almost like borderline frauds, right? Who are trying to pretend to be an L2, but that happens with any technology, right? That doesn't mean that you need to like change your terminology. Like, but if you're an honest project and you're actually trying to build something interesting, you might even be federated. But as long as you're upfront about it, that hey, this is a federated network, this is a federated L2, so to speak. I think from my perspective, that's fine. So I think having that common terminology and collapsing a lot of these projects that otherwise might look like going in different directions and putting them in the same category, that all of this is progress towards Bitcoin L2s, and here are all these different sort of like solutions that are being tried out. And finally, one last thing I would mention is innovations around things like BitVM that open a pathway to having sort of like more expressive sort of contracts on the Bitcoin L1, which could result in more trustless bridges and so on, is also very important. Because even if it's not perfect right now and more R&D is needed, at least it opens up a pathway or doorway where people can see that these L2s might be launching right now, but there's heavy R&D going for how to even reduce trust assumptions and so on. And I think that was a very sort of like a interesting big breakthrough almost that helped sort of like kickstart the Bitcoin L2 space.
Well, and one additional question around that, and in terms of scalability, there's always a discussion, and specifically now around the halving, of how scaling Bitcoin may impact miners and the entire mining culture that is. Would love to hear both of your opinions on how L2s or the L2 environment benefits the current Bitcoin miner communities. Muneeb, we'll start with you, and then Alexei.
Yeah, so I think in general, I would say that Bitcoin has approximately like a 8-year runway from now to figure out, high gas fees or high transaction fees, because the Coinbase rewards are going to keep going down, and they do become almost negligible, even with Bitcoin at $1 million or so at some point, right? So that's the runway. And I don't think I'm definitely not a Bitcoiner that likes to be complacent and be like, hey, Bitcoin has been working fine for 10 years and it's going to continue to work fine. No, we know that the Coinbase rewards are actually going down and something has to change. We would need to see more network activity and people willing to pay like high fees. And I think things like Ordinals, Runes, Bitcoin L2s are definitely helping here, especially with Bitcoin L2s. I expect to see a lot of traffic that is the in between L1 and L2 traffic, right? Like people are moving their BTC from the L1 to L2. I almost view the L1 as a cold storage. L2 is like sort of your hot wallet. Yes, you're taking a little bit more risk, but things are cheaper, faster over there. But you don't move your savings into the hot wallet, right? Like you're keeping bulk of your holdings in your cold storage on the L1. And the L1 is also the settlement layer, right? So the Stacks Nakamoto, for example, all the transactions that are happening, they're directly settling on the L1, benefiting from 100% of Bitcoin finality. And I think this traffic inflow could be very helpful because because there are not just one or two L2s, right? There are so many of them launching. So the aggregate effect of all of that on the L1 would be that the Bitcoin block space is becoming even more sort of like valuable. It's increasing the demand for BTC, and it's increasing sort of like the value of Bitcoin, and that's really good. And for miners, not only that, I think this new traffic would help sort of like direct revenue and fees at the L1. I think these miners are actually in a very ideal condition because they're infrastructure providers and they optimize running infrastructure. They can get into some of the running of the infrastructure of the L2s as well. It's a pretty natural sort of like next step for them, that if you're an L1 miner, you can start looking into mining some of these L2s as well and try to see how to maximize your profits that way.
Alexei, anything to add?
Well, I mean, I think it's very important to remember that, you know, Bitcoin security budget is ultimately what makes the whole thing work. You've had concerns around fragmentation since the early days. I mean, Satoshi Nakamoto himself created something called merge mining. And the idea there was, right, prevent fragmentation of hash rate, but also allow people to experiment in a synergetic way to Bitcoin. So not, create altcoins that, vampire mining power of Bitcoin and then reduce overall security, because now, think of it this way, if everybody has like a fraction of the hash rate, it becomes easier to attack. And I feel like there's very few layer twos out there that actually are keeping this in mind, that are building aligned with the core ecosystem. I feel right now you have lots of projects jumping on this orange tsunami, which is great because we have more builders and more developers and more ecosystem projects entering the ecosystem. But it's a similar issue that you see with Ethereum as well, where you have Celestia moving in to take over the DA space, and suddenly fees are no longer flowing to ETH. Which defeats the purpose of a layer two. And you have the whole debate, well, you're not on Ethereum, that you're not on L2 if you actually don't post data to Ethereum. And I do feel that we should have a discussion about this in the Bitcoin space. Like, if you're building a project that is only Bitcoin in name, and you don't even have ambitions to plug into Bitcoin in the future, well, then are you really a Bitcoin layer two? And then, maybe the tech we can debate and so on, but the alignment and the economic alignment, I think, is very important. And that's why on Bob, we're working with almost all the major mining players to integrate merge mining. So Bob, on day one, we're launching without Bitcoin security, and working in parallel, we already have it on testnet, and working with almost all the large mining pools to actually add merge mining. And we've developed a new form of merge mining that allows us to keep the fast block times and marry the best of both worlds. So fast block times, but also Bitcoin security, and at the same time still being connected to the Ethereum space, being able to import liquidity, and then getting all the ETH users who now, they have to choose across 40 ETH L2s. Somewhere there's one that does Bitcoin, that gives them access to Runes, Ordinals, BRC20s, Bitcoin Yield, different Bitcoin products. They go there, they start using the Bitcoin, they generate fees, and these fees actually partially flow back to the Bitcoin miners, which contributes to Bitcoin security budget. And I think, we've had the halving last week. We'll have the next one in 4 years. The next one is going to be interesting because we can always speculate and hope that the Bitcoin price will keep doubling and doubling, but it's not really a good, operational security bet that, I hope the Bitcoin price keeps doubling, otherwise I'll go out of business. And we see that. Like, we're working very close with Marathon Digital, for example, who, as an example, went beyond just mining. So you actually see this having this effect where miners go beyond their normal business, from mining and merge mining to, okay, we start now building relays to accept non-standard transactions. Now we actually cater to the use case, and that's what Marathon did with Slipstream, and you have that if tuple now following up, and you'll see all miners do the same. And then with Marathon Digital, we're working on Enduro and specifically Alice, which is a Bitcoin sidechain that will be merge mined and is targeted towards institutions, where Marathon is using their brand and their kind of the product line and their teams to onboard institutional players onto Bitcoin. And I feel that this is a unique kind of development. We've never seen this before. Previously, miners would always focus on mining, and suddenly we have this change narrative and shift where miners actually start building tech and participate in okay, let's build on Bitcoin, let's get more users so we actually can sustain Bitcoin security budget. And I think initially during this, initial hype cycle, people will not care as much, but as time progresses, you'll see the L2s that align with Bitcoin miners just outpace everybody else. Because again, if you're building in an ecosystem and you're aligned with it, you're just going to get more support, things become easier. And that's a problem that Lightning actually had because it was not aligned with miners and would basically, take away all the fees, which long term, we always have this debate, what happens then?
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, last question. We are coming into the beginning of Bitcoin season 2. There's a ton of projects that are racing for TVL. We've got new consensus mechanisms. We've got new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. Looking ahead to the summer, aside from Nakamoto and aside from Bob's mainnet, what are you most excited about around the Bitcoin L2 space as things evolve here in the next 6 months? Alexei, I'll let you start.
So I think there's a technical and there's a product one kind of, or ecosystem play. Technical, really excited for BTVM V2. Spent some time already working on it, and there are still a few quirks to work out. There's been lots of FUD, but that's good. There's lots of new versions coming out. The innovation harpy is accelerating. We went from idea to, okay, we actually know how to build a bridge. We just need to spec it out, and we're starting to build prototypes within months. And I'm really excited to see first prototypes, hopefully, coming out towards the summer. Maybe not, but I'm very optimistic that we'll see first things that we can actually play around with. And then on the ecosystem side, what I'm really, really excited about is to see Bitcoin layer 2s start challenging and beating some of the top ETH2s in terms of not only TVL, right? Because that's a temporary metric that can come and go, but actually in terms of developers, active users, and community building. And I think we'll start seeing first signals of that in the summer. And once we start, rising the ranks, and then you suddenly see more Bitcoin L2s on DeFi Line on L2 with basically being ahead of everybody else, that's when I think the hype will break loose. Because to end kind of this, from my side, this interview, this panel, on one thing, 90% of alt L1s and L2s started with a value prop. You cannot do this thing on Bitcoin, so I'm going to build a chain on which you can do it. Now imagine if you suddenly can do everything on Bitcoin. I think it's going to be a very interesting couple of years where instead of alt L1s going to become Ethereum L2s, they will start to become Bitcoin L2s. And we've seen first of them already make moves, and I think it's just going to get much, much more.
Thank you, Alexei. Muneeb, quick ending thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty excited. I mentioned before, but I'm pretty excited about BitVM as well, and not just the main R&D branch through Robin, but also other very intelligent minds are also working on it. I think just a couple of days ago, Sergio from worked on Rootstock before, probably one of the people who has thought more about security of bridges than anyone in the Bitcoin ecosystem. He came up with BitVMX, like sort of like a other version of like how to do similar things. And I haven't read the paper yet, but I'm excited about such stuff, right? Like, because I think some alteration of this is really going to work. And I think that's going to be very, very impactful. One other thing, like I am excited about a lot of stuff, but I can only pick one more. So I think on the ecosystem side, I would say I would personally be super interested in seeing Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. Because if you look at Ethereum or Solana and other systems, one point of centralization that people don't really, I think that much about is that if there is a contentious hard fork, companies like Circle or Tether can actually decide the fork if they want to, right? Because they're that powerful. If Circle says that we are only going to support this fork and not the other one, there's like billions of dollars of USDC supply on Ethereum. So I think for our industry to grow, as much as I like these options, I think they will exist and they will continue to serve like a purpose. I do think we need a fully decentralized Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. And I think there's no better place to build that than on Bitcoin L2s, because you are the closest to BTC over here. And I think Bitcoin is the pristine capital, it's the most decentralized asset. And I think if you use that as collateral for building stablecoins, like that is an application that I'm very, very excited about.
Awesome. Muneeb, Alexei, thank you both very much. Exciting to see what becomes of not just Bitcoin season 2, but also layer 2 or L2 summer as we're making waves here in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Thank you both very much.